What is happening, Magnusites? Got people telling me this is a straight up setup. A couple of videos we might check out right here.
President-elect Trump slamming Judge Merchan's decision to sentence him in New York City on Friday, posting this quote on Truth Social: "The legal system is broken and businesses can't take a chance in getting caught up in this quicksand. It's all rigged. It's this case against a political opponent, me." And while DA Alvin Bragg and Merchan have their sights set on Trump, they're
Don't tell me this dude don't look like Ray J to you. They look like a thick Ray J.
ignoring the rampant crime in New York City. I'm not kidding. Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett writes Merchan is desperate to brand Trump as a convicted felon before his inauguration. He joins us now. Greg, you believe, and the president believes, this is personal.
Oh, absolutely. I think Merchan is desperate to stain the incoming president with the label convicted felon. And understand, Brian, under the law, Trump is not officially convicted of anything until he's formally sentenced, even though many in the media, of course, began immediately and incorrectly
saying
calling him a convicted felon when the jury verdict came in. And that was the whole...
Yeah, they said that in every single speech that they delivered. He's a convicted felon.
Goal of indicting Trump and putting him on trial. Democrats assumed their politically driven lawfare campaign would destroy him. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Voters saw it for what it was, a corrupt weaponization of the law, and it backfired spectacularly. Many Americans recognized this was a sham trial, a preordained outcome. It drove a lot of them to Donald Trump, and he won.
Yep.
Right, and he just actually...
And the people recognize that it's like a witch hunt for this dude. It's like, nah, we ain't paying attention to y'all no more. And you see they didn't. Their landslide victory.
Dominated the election cycle. It just put to the side his whole primary challenge. And he, for better or for worse, he just dominated it. I know he just wants it over with and doesn't want to relive it. But just think about the consistency or the lack thereof. When you come to New York City and Alvin Bragg, another George Soros-funded DA who thinks criminal first, if you look at their misdemeanor and their downgrades, look at this full screen. You had 2,365 misdemeanors were downgraded from felonies. You had 2,188 to a violation of 1,193. So you have a situation where serious crimes are downgraded. When it comes to Trump, they put all these misdemeanors together to make it a felony and put him on trial.
Yeah, and it's, one of the reasons why these George Soros-funded progressive district attorneys have ruined major cities in blue states. And, Alvin Bragg is a prime example. If you're Trump, a misdemeanor business records violation somehow becomes a phantom felony. And in the end, nobody actually knew what he was convicted of. And it wasn't a unanimous jury verdict, the best we can tell. Nobody really knows. A bedrock violation. Bragg goes after, good Samaritans like Daniel Penny. Or a bodega worker who dared to defend himself when he was attacked. And he goes after a politician for purely political reasons. This is what Alvin Bragg has wrought to New York City.
So Monday, today, the election gets certified. Friday, they want him looking like he's a convicted criminal. But bottom line is that helped fuel the president's popularity.
10th.
Eventually, of course, he'll probably appeal it. You said you need a conviction in order to appeal it, a sentence in order to appeal it. So maybe this is a painful part of the process that ultimately lead to its exoneration. Thanks, and you write about it on FoxNews.com. Thanks, Greg. I'm Steve Doocy. I'm Brian Kill.
Good Lord, man. So this man right here, along with the rest of you, has said that it is a set-up. A complete setup is what he says right here. So let's hear what the man has to say here. Watched him before. Seems pretty knowledgeable.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. Thank you for being here. Two great guests. Representative Michael Waltz is going to be the National Security Advisor. And Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, former U.S. Navy Lieutenant
Zuhdi.
Commander, founder of American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement.
Sound like a pimp name. What's your name? Zuhdi. Zuhdi Zaddy.
But before we go to our guests, we have this judge in Manhattan who says, we're going to do sentencing next week of Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very disturbed by the legal analysis by defense counsel, former prosecutors who say, okay, look, this may not be a great thing, but at least it gives Trump the opportunity to appeal. The hell are you talking about? That's what I just heard. Donald Trump is an innocent man. He didn't commit any misdemeanors. He didn't commit any felonies, not in New York State, not at the federal level, not anywhere. He was subjected to a rump trial, to a Stalinist trial that violated at least 4 of his constitutional rights under the Bill of Rights of the federal Constitution.
Wow. I've never heard rump trial before. I know what he could mean by Stalinist trial, though. Rump trial meaning. The Rump Parliament was a group of English Parliament members that remained after a military coup in 1648 that left only about 200 members. The term rump refers to a remnant or offshoot and was first used in this context. The Rump Parliament was responsible for the trial of King Charles I, who was tried for high treason in 1649. The Rump Parliament established a High Court of Justice for the trial, which took place in Westminster Hall. During the trial, Charles I refused to enter a plea and disputed the court's authority. That rhymed like the way of the game bars, but was found guilty. That also rhymed. Interesting.
What are you talking about? We have a judge and a prosecutor who timed this case to try and stop Trump from getting the nomination right before, I think it was Super Tuesday, throughout the primary process. And in the general election, he was forced to go into that courtroom. A gag order for a presidential candidate. And we sit here and say, well, at least now he can appeal. Appeal where? In New York? That's not a risky proposition, is it? The New York Gulag is where you go if you don't want justice and you're Republican or conservative. This was a runaway train. It's still a runaway train. 10 days before an inauguration, this guy Mershon, an acting state judge, who has no jurisdictional authority in a phony case of this sort to begin with, decides that we're going to have a sentencing hearing. But he writes this 18-page decision that I read, barely literate, but let me suggest he probably had some help from my kook law professor, but nonetheless, it doesn't matter. He says presidential immunity from criminal process for a sitting president does not extend to a president-elect. Gee willikers. Well, once he rules on sentencing, there's an appeal process. That's part of the criminal process, and Donald Trump will be president. And that appeal process will go on throughout his presidency if he's stuck in New York. He says only the president has the authority of the chief executive. A president-elect does not. A president-elect does not. So what is he trying to do here? Smear Donald Trump all during his presidency. Exactly what the Department of Justice in its 2000 memo said is a huge problem at the federal level. That is, you cannot have a sitting president with this stuff hanging over his head. It undermines his effectiveness. It undermines his representation of the American people with foreign governments. Mershon knows exactly what he's doing. He's responsible for this whole damn thing. President-elect immunity, retroactive immunity, so he concocts these ideas that the president's lawyers are pushing for presidential-elect immunity and retroactive immunity. No, they're not. Essentially, he does not seriously address the supremacy clause. Why? Because if he did, he'd be out of business. He had no authority whatsoever to oversee this case. It should have been dismissed immediately. But don't worry, we're told by defense lawyers, we're told by former federal prosecutors, look, unconditional discharge, no incarceration. No incarceration. If this clown excuse for a judge tried to put Donald Trump in prison or an ankle bracelet or anything of that kind, what do you think would happen? The Department of Justice would walk into the front door of the Supreme Court, they'd take up the case immediately, and they'd rule against this guy, and they'd put him down. He's evil. Not completely stupid, but he's evil. That's why he didn't do it. That's why no fines, no penalties. That's why Trump doesn't actually have to show up in person. Because he doesn't want the case to go where it ought to go, to the Supreme Court of the United States. This is interfering with a presidential election. It's interfering with the presidency. It's interfering with an inauguration. It's federal in every way.
Points.
And we're stuck in a New York State court. He says this provides the defendant with finality. He sounds like the legal analysts. So he can appeal. So here's the guy who sets the fire and then says, I'm putting out the fire so you can get on with your life. And then he basically addresses but really ignores most of the most pertinent points of the Department of Justice 2000 and 1973 memos. I want to talk about this. I want to remind you of a few things, as painful as this may be.
Okay.
A complete setup of an innocent man. And we're all supposed to sit here and say, okay, they attack the federal judicial system, they attack the state justice system, they attack our primary electoral system at the federal level, they attack the federal electoral system, and now they're attacking the office of the presidency when Donald Trump is president, but it's okay, it could have been worse. What the hell are these people talking about? Bragg charged President Trump with a low-level misdemeanor for which the statute of limitations had already run, and nobody was ever charged with. In the first place, he accused Trump of falsely reporting non-disclosure agreements they called hush money. It's funny. Every press organization that calls it hush money has entered into non-disclosure agreements. It's a non-disclosure agreement. It's the nature of doing business. That's what it is. Then he added 33 counts by charging every entry in the books as a separate crime. So we have 34 crimes. Since the statute of limitations had run, Bragg then increased the alleged violation from a misdemeanor to a felony. Well, how did he do that?
Yeah, I'd like to know.
Bragg claimed President Trump's real goal was to commit a different crime, thereby reviving the misdemeanor statute, and then he converts it into a felony by talking about an undermining felonious act, which he really would never describe, but everybody knew it was a federal campaign law. But why wouldn't he say so? Because he has no jurisdiction. And neither does Mershon on the federal campaign law issue. Later, Bragg claimed there were other state crimes, election law crimes, another misdemeanor in which the statute of limitations had run. So there were no laws, there were no former prosecutions, they're way out of their lane with federal law, but don't worry. Trump can now appeal within the gulag that is the state New York judicial system. There's not another case in New York that I've been able to find where a prosecutor has combined crimes like this. But what was being alleged did not violate federal election laws. A former chairman of the Federal Election Commission, Bradley Smith, was going to testify as an expert witness in the trial and said, this doesn't violate federal election law. But Judge Mershon, acting state judge, conflicted Democrat hack, rogue judge Mershon effectively prevented him from testifying. Even at this point, it wasn't stated by the prosecution that the underlying crime was a federal election-connected crime. Why? Because Bragg had no authority to prosecute a case, the basis of which was a federal campaign law violation. And the judge had no authority to adjudicate such a case. Mershon knew that.
You see why I told y'all for years I was just never really into politics and news, certain aspects of news. Like, this stuff gets complicated, man. The trickery, the hoops they jump through to catch people and set people up and try people and convict people, and all the dirtiness of the politics, man, and loopholes and laws and just all these little nitpicky things that they, man.
But he wanted Trump convicted. So he didn't require Bragg to reveal the underlying offense till actually the very end, when it was too late for the defense to do much about it. Think about all this. The non-disclosure agreements were never campaign contributions under federal law. There was no underlying criminal violation. These Misdemeanors could not be resuscitated, let alone turned into felonies, let alone turned into 34 felonies. There was no jurisdiction for the DA, no jurisdiction for the judge to be pursuing the case or holding a trial. Mershon's conduct during the trial was also openly and grotesquely Stalinist. He repeatedly and angrily ruled against legitimate motions by the defense. Against most of their arguments, he ruled against legitimate objections during the trial and often angrily admonished the lawyers in front of the jury to send them another message. He berated key defense witnesses. He cut off testimony. He narrowed and directed the testimony of defense witnesses. Meanwhile, Bragg's witnesses could talk about anything they wanted. Sex, sexual allegations, their views about campaign election laws, being the experts that they were. They weren't experts.
Everything this man is saying is true. Man, don't get into politics. Good Lord.
They could go on and on pretty much about anything they wanted. That testimony wasn't probative. It was prejudicial. A basis for reversal right there. But it didn't matter. And it stacked up the prejudicial testimony, salacious allegations, and Hope Hicks's testimony. She had worked closely with President Trump, with candidate Trump. She had 4 conversations when Trump was president about the payments, when they were being made and so forth. Not because it was criminal or surreptitious, because she had those conversations. Trump was president. Also, we have Madeleine Westerhout, testimony on how the president signed his checks. So we have an immunity decision by the Supreme Court. So rather than hold off the case while the court's ruling on immunity relevant to what's going on in that Manhattan courthouse, Mershon's full speed ahead. He was the first one out of the box, and he wanted to be the first one out to try and cripple Trump, defeat Trump, imprison Trump.
I'm going to stop this here. This is wild. I'll finish watching this on my own. I get the point, though. Good Lord, man. Tell me what y'all think. The comments are open. Educate me. Tell me some stuff I don't know. Help me out here. 10 million subscribers. Woo! My God. This is going to be a wild time. Wild ride to the 20s.